recording. Start. And it's a 30-minute show, so I'm going to have to cut it off at like 28:50 or something like that.
Okay, that sounds good.
Alrighty. Welcome back once again to the talk show. This is episode 6 with yours truly, Jason Takhtadjian. And today we have ourselves once again another very special guest with us. She is the newly appointed director of KVPR here in the Central Valley, Elizabeth Arakelian. How are you doing today? Welcome to the show.
Good. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here. And we got the press release not even 2 weeks ago that you've been appointed the new director of radio director of everything going on pretty much over there at KVPR. So I'm first of all thankful that you're here and made the time to come on over here. I know that it's not the easiest to drive at the station right now because of all the construction going on McKinley, but I'm glad that you made it here. I'm glad that we're able to learn a little bit about each other and learn about your journalistic background because being the director of radio is no joke. I mean that's a big deal. So I want to first just welcome you to the show and just ask you how you're doing.
Thank you. I'm doing well. It's been a whirlwind. It's felt a little bit like McKinley Avenue right now in my life as I get adjusted to all the new road work that kind of happens as you get acclimated to a new position, new schedule, new responsibilities, all good things. But yeah, definitely a kind of a construction zone is a good analogy.
I guess we could talk a little bit more about that just as far as, what that's been like. It's only been 2 weeks, right? As time of taping, it's been only 2 weeks that you've been appointed as the director there. So kind of tell us about what that's like, getting, your director hat on now and just what that changes for your day-to-day.
I think it would be helpful if I started and explained a little bit what I did before.
Yeah, let's do that.
For the first 3.5 years, I was at KVPR, which is Valley Public Radio. A lot of folks know it by that name. 89.3 FM on the radio dial, 89.1 if you're down in Bakersfield. I was a host. So I started as the afternoon host of All Things Considered in the evening, kind of our evening drive time show, certainly a flagship across the country. And also NPR has a morning edition, which is the morning drive show. So after a couple of years, I hosted the morning show. So I had the privilege of hosting in both day parts and getting to know the station from a variety of angles that way. So as the director of radio, I'm now really in charge of ensuring that our current hosts have everything they need. That can include ensuring they have the day's programming information, that they're available, that I don't need to find a substitute. A lot of logistics that kind of have come. And I've continued to host our daily news podcast, which is a relatively new development we launched in September. So I'm still involved in the daily news production. Even as a host, when I wasn't hosting the live show, I would produce news for our newscasts and things like that. So still quite involved doing interviews for the podcast, certainly involved in the news cycle. It's been very busy the last few months trying to localize some big national stories. But then the logistical changes I'm responsible for as well, overseeing the host, but also looking at the programming that we have and ensuring that it fits our budget, that it's working for our listeners. It's a kind of a contentious time right now with NPR because there's a chance we could lose some federal funding. So really just being mindful of the situation we're in, and we're not going anywhere. We have served the Valley for many decades and will continue to, but really just trying to look at things from sort of, I like to say, like a zoomed out lens, having more of a strategic role in the station's operations than just where I was just hosting mainly and really involved in the news. So I've enjoyed getting to zoom out a little bit.
That's good, and it also helps, to be able to zoom out and have that background of being a host already, right? So that helps you help the current hosts because you know what you could put yourself in their shoes, right?
Yes, I hope I haven't overwhelmed them as I've been training them. We've been training a former reporter of ours. She's fantastic. She fills in as well. And as I'm getting her up to speed, it's so interesting because I'm so grateful that other folks have the opportunity to learn these skills because I don't know a situation outside of radio where you would utilize these skills maybe in a studio like this, but you're learning to operate the board, you're learning to hit your time posts and hit your deadlines. And I love training people to do that, but it's been an opportunity for me too to ensure that I'm communicating clearly and preparing them so that they can go on and host confidently with their own personality and their own kind of spin. But there are logistical details that you really have to understand the way a clock operates for a show, and teaching people that has been kind of a new muscle for me. I received that teaching and I was so grateful for that, and I kind of went off on my own for a few years. So now I'm like, wait a second, where was I 3 years ago? Because it's a really different headspace when you're in a studio and you don't have that experience. It takes some time to get comfortable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, I can relate when it comes to the first time being in a studio. When it comes to my broadcast journalism career, I remember being very shaky and nervous. I mean, when I first moved to Fresno, I already had about 2.5 years of anchoring experience. However, because it was a new situation, new setting, I will never forget the first time I filled in anchoring here at the studios was for CBS 47, and I had my hand down on the table, and I didn't move it the entire time until the end of the A block, and then I move it from my hand off the table from the end of the A block, and there's a puddle of sweat.
Yes,
Because I was just so nervous,
totally,
just so tense, and it's something that you have to have the reps to overcome.
100%. Radio, you have the added benefit of not being seen. So in a way, you can kind of, as long as your voice is stable, you can kind of fudge it even if you're nervous. But I will say, even to this day, when I'm under deadline or we're trying to record the podcast and it's late in the day, I have seen my own sweaty fingerprints on the table. Because, also when you're reading through a lot of stuff, like to us, chatting for, 20, 30 minutes doesn't seem like a big deal. Recording and hosting for long periods of time, 5 minutes can seem like a very long time. There's a lot of words you can trip up on. Do you have your pronouncers correct? Is everything timing properly? Like, as a host, I'm sure you can appreciate, it's a really different experience than just being a listener.
Yeah, absolutely. So completely different sides of a coin when it comes to that. You did mention that it has been quite a busy start to the year, and if I do say so myself, it has been when it comes to our industry, when it comes to news, national news, local news. You did mention it's been a bit of a challenge to nationalize or localize some national stories over this past few months before you took this directing position. I want to ask you, what's one story that stands out for you maybe this year? Because ever since this new year has started, 2025, we've had tons of stories going on nationally, internationally.
Yes, so many. Even just today, our podcast episode was about Pope Francis dying and what the local diocese in Fresno is doing to prepare, because we have the conclave coming up and they'll elect the new pope. And there's so many Catholics in the San Joaquin Valley. So that was a story we felt it was important to get a local angle on, a local touch. And we spoke with the communications director for the Diocese of Fresno, and he did a really good job of just sort of explaining people in the valley's relationship to the Pope in Italy. So that was really nice. Even earlier this year, there were some immigration raids in Kern County that were quite serious and concerning. We spoke to a lot of people about that. What was interesting about that too, and this is something we always try to be mindful of, is those raids, I believe, started before President Trump was officially in office. And so there was concern of, was immigrations and customs enforcement kind of acting out on their own in anticipation of this president who had been so vocal about his plans to deport people? Or was this, where was this guidance coming from? And how was the Valley reacting? And we have since had subsequent conversations about that. And I think that that's just an example of a really big national issue that's really important locally, understanding who's affected, what resources are available. And, those are things that I know, we've talked to people on both sides. We've talked to folks who give resources to folks who might be here without documentation. And we've also spoken to local county sheriffs who have said, we will comply with federal rules that are legal. We're not going to go out of our way to, create problems, because a lot of undocumented folks here are contributors to our society. So that's an example of a very contentious issue I think everybody has been exposed to, that we've tried to be really thoughtful about talking to multiple sides. And I think that that's what's kind of been hard for journalists right now, is there's so many big, important stories happening. It's hard to cover them all. And it's sometimes hard to understand not just the education piece for the public, but also making sure that we're representing all potential facets. And, you know, we have limitations with our newscasts and our shows. We can't always give the depth of, you know, the story that we want to, but we do try to hit those top lines, especially on these big issues. And our podcast is pretty short. It's just a 7 or 8 minute conversation for the interview. It's 10 to 15 minutes total. But we've covered a lot of big issues, and we'll cover them multiple times if we don't feel that we've done enough.
Absolutely. And really quick, tell us how we can watch and listen to those podcasts.
So the podcast is called Central Valley Daily. It's a daily news podcast, 5 days a week. You can find it anywhere you get podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It's also on the KVPR website. You can listen there as well. There's a KVPR app. Pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. I know we all have a bunch we subscribe to, and I just urge people, I'm like, just hit subscribe, give it a couple listens. And not to toot our own horn, but we have a great producer and news team, and they put so much work into this podcast. You can scroll back. A lot of the episodes can hang around for a few days. We do a news headline portion, which is the day's news, but we try to do these more in-depth conversations on stories like immigration and big moments, because we know that those are things people might want to listen to a couple days later. It doesn't always have to be, you know, first thing in the morning, though. We drop it really early so that people can listen on their way to work.
Absolutely. And you know, when it comes to our industry and this year, when it comes to all the different stories that have been going on nationally and internationally, there are a lot of contentious stories. And I am still learning a lot when it comes to journalism, as far as how to tell stories, but how to also approach stories. So I guess, you know, you did touch on it a little bit, but I'll ask you one more time. When it comes to these sort of stories where you know there's a lot of people on one side or another side, how do you stay neutral? How do you stay focused on the story?
I think about this so much, especially because in this new position, I feel even more responsibility to be mindful of the stories we're putting out. And, you know, to listeners who might not know, we purchase NPR programming, so we're a local station. So certain things, sometimes when I talk to listeners, they'll say, oh, I didn't quite like this story. And it's sometimes it's, you know, a story we did, sometimes it's a national story, and I can direct them to other resources. But understanding that to most people who turn on the radio, they don't always know the difference between a locally produced story or a national story. So I try to be mindful when we're doing local stories of really finding information and facts that will localize the piece, that make people feel seen and make it feel like there's a sense of place. You know, when you hear sources in Fresno or Visalia or Merced or Bakersfield, you connect, your ear perks up naturally, even if the story is within a national show or whatnot. So definitely try to create a sense of place. In terms of trying to keep neutral, I think something that has always been the case for journalists that we have to be mindful of, unfortunately, is that official sources, we want them to be the authority on a topic, but sometimes we have to scrutinize them too. In fact, most often we do. Sometimes official narratives are not accurate. I mean, politicians and government agencies often want to portray things in a light that's flattering to them. And I think that that's where the importance of talking to multiple people and getting different perspectives on a single issue is so important, because we, unfortunately, that's our job as journalists, is to take the information, but we have to scrutinize it in a way to understand, okay, is this really the truth, or is this what someone wants me to hear? And that's a question I think the reporters at KVPR and all of us at the station ask ourselves a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that, you know, you have to kind of read between the lines, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to, you know, understanding what's cop talk, what's PR talk, what are they hiding, what doesn't make sense. And that's something that just naturally as a journalist you have to have that hat on, just to say that whatever information comes your way, you got to take it with a grain of salt, right?
Yes, I think a healthy dose of skepticism is probably good for anybody, to be honest. But yeah, we definitely, like you say, when we put on our journalism hat, really have to hone in on that, because, you know, especially I think so much has happened at breakneck speed when it comes to political issues, that really staying up to speed on things is hard. But we always have to have that mindset, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, of just, what is this really saying? Who is this benefiting if this is true? And what would the other person say to this who might not agree with this? Always, like you say, keeping those thoughts in your head. Yeah, with PR, which I've worked in PR, I mean, in all fairness to them, we love their support and stories and ideas, but we got to be critical of that too.
Yeah.
And yeah, police narratives. I mean, all of it.
Absolutely. I mean, you did mention you worked in PR, and I want to talk about just kind of your background in a more further sense. But before we get into that, I want to just talk to you about just how you got into this space to begin with. Like, let's reel it all the way back, and let's really kind of understand, how did Elizabeth get into the world of news and broadcast and everything that this entails, journalism? How did you find a liking to this? Because I feel like when I talk to people, there's various stories, and some of them are typical. Oh, I grew up always wanting to be one of these. For me, it's not so much the case, but I want to know what your story is like.
I might be an unusual case as well. I studied English literature in college, and I went to UC Santa Cruz. And you actually had to study another language to do this translation theory course that was mandated. So I took Spanish in high school, kept up with that in college. So I really was focused on getting my English degree. I didn't have a huge plan of what I was going to do after that. And while I was in college, I wrote for the newspaper there because a roommate of mine worked there as an editor. I hated it, to be totally honest. I did not like it. And I ended up doing this internship program in Washington, D.C., and I interned at a couple museums, and I really liked that right before graduation. So I graduate with this English degree and this experience. I was at the National Portrait Gallery, which is part of the Smithsonian, and I thought, I think I might want to do this museum thing. But I moved back home after college. I'm from Turlock originally. A lovely museum in Turlock, but not a ton of museums in the valley that I found were options for me to find a job. So the long story short of it is my hometown paper, the Turlock Journal, needed a reporter. And through a series of events, I ended up working there. And that was probably the best job I could have ever had, because I think you can agree, like, as a reporter, you learn so many skills. You learn to talk to people, you learn to ask good questions, you learn to communicate yourself. You learn what's important in a conversation and in a story, and it really does a lot to help you kind of grow up and mature into like a professional, because you're covering things from mayoral races to football games. Like in those smaller markets, you could really be assigned anything. So that was my first real job, was as a reporter. I fell in love. I went off to NYU and got my master's in journalism, and had a series of other jobs I can get into as well if you like. But that was kind of my backstory, was I went from really just loving to read and learn and not particularly interested in being a journalist in my early days, to then realizing, wait, this is actually the perfect position for someone who likes to read and learn. And I just had to learn to find my niche.
Wow, that's really interesting. And you went and you also pursued a master's degree, right?
Yes.
So tell me about that choice, because for me, whenever I was going through journalism school in UNLV, that was something that my parents and family would always pressure or just be like, hey, why aren't you getting your master's degree?
Yeah.
You know, whenever you get a master's degree, this and that. And I was always just, I guess maybe I didn't have the right guidance when it came to, you know, why would I go for my master's degree? So what was it that made you go for your master's degree?
Well, there was some parental pressure involved as well, to be honest. But to be honest, a master's in journalism actually is kind of not controversial, but some people don't see it as necessary. Some folks, fantastic reporters who don't have masters, it's a job you can completely learn on the job. And I think for me, what I realized after a few years at the paper was that while I was doing the job, I didn't really have the formal training, and I didn't know what was next. So I saw it as an opportunity. I always knew I wanted to go back to school before it was too long. And I saw it as an opportunity to strengthen what I was already doing and give myself that formal experience. And what's great about NYU and many of these programs is they require internships. They require you to do classes that are multimedia. I was writing profiles, I was hosting podcasts, I was interviewing people on the street. Like, it just forces you out to experiment in a way that you don't get to when you're in a job. And to experiment with different types of media, but also to just hone your craft. So it was just a fantastic experience, a complete highlight of my education and my life in many ways. And I remained close with people from that program and faculty. And I think that that's another thing, is it was like an avenue for me professionally. I have so many resources through NYU still and keep in touch with people. And it was definitely the right choice. And I recall someone saying to me when I was going off to the program, they said, you know, you don't need a master's in journalism to be a journalist. Like, you already are one. And I said, no, I know. But something in my gut told me, you know, I want to pursue this in this way. And I have not looked back.
That's really neat. I mean, what was it like being in New York as well? Every show I hit the microphone.
Oh, that's okay. I hit the table.
Every show I hit the microphone. But what was that like living in New York? Were you dorming? What was that like walking to school? Like, just tell me what that sort of like going from the Central Valley to New York.
So many people ask me this, and I never quite know how to respond because it's so different, but I was so ready for it that I just acclimated really quickly. But yeah, I lived in a very small, tiny studio apartment. I would walk to school. I was in Lower Manhattan at the time. And it was fantastic. I mean, I had no car. I took the subway everywhere. I walked everywhere. Even stories, I remember going out to Queens on this train, and I was like an hour. It's like that cliche, like you have to get lost to find yourself. Like, perfect place to go because you learn to rely on yourself in a lot of ways. And living in New York is fantastic because there's so many events all the time. If you're interested in like seeing authors speak about their new books or media personalities, athletes, performances, it was just an abundance of opportunity. So I found acclimating to New York was easier. Returning to the Valley and leaving New York was harder.
Oh, okay.
I'm glad that I did it because I'm very close with my family, and I came back shortly before COVID hit, so it was the best decision I could have made. But it really struck me interestingly, not going to New York was okay. It was hard. I mean, of course, there's always homesickness and things, but coming back was the bigger adjustment where it was like I'd had so much stimulation, and then to be back in such a rural area, I didn't quite realize just how rural the San Joaquin Valley is until I got back here. And I was like, wow. Mm-hmm. And I even had a girlfriend of mine visited, and she was like, Liz, you're really from the country. Like, you weren't kidding. And I was like, I always thought of it as like suburbia. Like, you know, there's so many housing developments, but
right.
No, to people not from the Valley, this is very rural, and that really hit me. So I'm happy to say I love both. But yeah, it's a transition. You know, going up to the 48th floor for your internship is really different than driving on McKinley. So, you know, it's just, it's nice to have experienced both, though.
I was going to say, something does tell me that New York has part of your heart.
It does, yeah.
Because my sister, she loves New York as well, and she wants to go live there one of these days, and she talks about New York like you talk about New York. Like, she wants to have that experience of not having a car and just being able to take public transport to wherever she needs to be, and then that's it.
Yes, it's very freeing, and I think if you have that interest, it's certainly something like, I know everyone's situation is different, but I'm always like, if you can go, even for 1 year, 6 months, to have that sort of self-reliance, to be able to walk out the door with nothing but your keys and your wallet and your phone and just like see where you end up.
Yeah.
It's grab a coffee on the street. I mean, New Yorkers get a bad rap, but they're the kindest people. Like, I just really have to say, it's kind of one of those, I think because it's such a cramped city, like everybody's very conscious. Like, my neighbors were so polite, and like everybody wants, everybody's conscious that we're all kind of stuck there together, and a lot of people are not from there. So it's a lot of out-of-towners, out-of-staters that I think everyone's looking for community, and so when you're there a while, you kind of learn, like these are all people just from the different Turlocks of the world, like coming here, and there's a great sense of community among people there for sure.
Wow, that's really neat.
Yeah.
So you go from that sort of freedom and that sort of experience with New York, and then you come back to the Central Valley, and not only do you get back on your feet and you're back into the work of it, getting the PIO position with UC Merced, right?
Yes.
But the pandemic hits.
Yes.
So tell me what that's like also, dealing with the pandemic while also now having this new position as a PIO for a college in California.
Yeah, it was really uncharted territory for a lot of people, and that was a blessing and a curse, of course, because we were all figuring it out. I do remember those early days, though. I mean, there were constant calls with the police department and other departments on the campus to ensure our messaging was accurate to students, parents. You can imagine people were concerned. It was a really good introduction into crisis communications. We had what are called tabletop discussions, where we would sit down with someone from the police department and say, okay, hypothetically, if there's a crisis on campus, how do we respond? What does each person do? It's a big campus. I mean, these are big institutions. So when COVID hit, it was very unique because it wasn't like one thing happened. It was affecting everyone, and there was no real person that was like a culprit. So it was uncharted territory. But I think ultimately the introduction I got to that was just continuing to be communicative with people, being clear about what we know, being on the same page as employees and as a campus. And really going from there was learning, how do we bring back students safely? I mean, this was at a point where we were like wiping our groceries off, if you can even think back to that.
Yep.
And there were a lot of different departments that were, liaising with students more so than I was. But yeah, everyone went online, and I think it was really isolating in a lot of ways for a lot of people. I was on a great team and very lucky that we were able to see each other constantly on Zoom. But I think for me, it was probably the greatest introduction to crisis communications and valuing what public information officers do. I have such respect and appreciation for the PIOs I deal with because I've been in their shoes. And sometimes you're in the middle. Sometimes people want information you don't have yet. And we really tried to navigate that together as a team. But yeah, it was pretty uncharted territory.
That's kind of, I don't want to say scary, but like very anxiety inducing, I guess. But at the same time, like you said, it was for the good in a way because it prepared you for so many other things.
Yes.
So many other ways to manage crisis.
I think experiencing that like heightened my threshold for uncertainty in a way. You know what I mean? It's like this, and again, it was like kind of a double-edged sword that everyone was experiencing that, but there was something about, okay, we really have to activate here. And I remember we had a couple faculty on campus who were experts in basically viruses. And we had a video, this is shortly before the state shut down, we had some local reporters come and they did like a talk with these faculty. This is what this virus is, this is what we know. So we used it as an opportunity to share this important information that we actually had from these well-trained faculty members. But then shortly thereafter, it was like everybody go home and all the interviews were Zoom. But I'll never forget driving home from that interview. I think it was a day or two before the state shut down, and there was no one on the freeway. And I had been facilitating this interview. And it was, I just, again, I have a lot of appreciation for the position that PR and PIOs can be put in, especially in a crisis situation like, when we hear from PIOs with like police departments and there's been a crime and stuff. It's not easy. You are a human. You are affected too when things happen. So
that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And I'm still learning that myself as a young journalist.
We are people. We all are people.
Now, we have very little time left, so I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. There was one question that we haven't gotten to yet, and that's your Armenian background. So if you wanted to quickly give us a Spark Notes edition of your Armenian heritage and background to end us off.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. A little bit of history. The original Armenian settlers that came to the Fresno area, I believe they were the Seropians. Long story short, they were from an area called Marsavan in Turkey, and they came to Fresno and they loved it and saw the climate was good for growing things, and they told their friends to come. And my family was actually among those first, I think they're called the first 40, or there's kind of a term for the first 40 Armenians who arrived from Marsavan, Turkey. So my family has been in Fresno since the 1880s, and they migrated. They were melon farmers for many years, and then my great-grandfather migrated up into start farming in Merced County, and that's where my family still farms to this day. So,
wow.
Yeah, very, even though I didn't grow up in Fresno, I have family here, and there's definitely some interesting Arakelian history even I have learned in recent years. So,
well, I'd love to learn more about it whenever I have you on for another episode, because we're going to have to do another episode to just talk about that.
Absolutely.
But that's all the time that we have, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for being here on the talk show. And again, I do look forward to seeing what you do as the director of KVPR, and I really do hope that we can have you on for another episode and see where everything goes. This is going to be really exciting to see, just Armenians in the Central Valley thriving.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty.